Hello, everybody, and welcome to the end. It's a bit of a sad episode today because, the story's over, right? At least the part of the story that we get to see is over and done with. It's always interesting for me to end a campaign, to for reals end a campaign. You don't see that very often, I think. There's something about role-playing games that, we'll get into it in a little bit. If you're not sure what you're watching here, if you've just sort of wandered into either of the channels that are showing this, this is the post show for our live Apocalypse World campaign. This is episode 10 of Post Apocalypse World. And in this show, we sit down and I answer questions and talk about the episode from the day before. So the sort of things that have gone on. And normally, I would use this time to prepare for the next episode, but there won't be one. So today might be a little shorter than usual, but I say that every time that I think it's going to be short, and we end up going over the hour. So we're going to spend about 60 minutes just hanging out and talking about Apocalypse World, about our particular Apocalypse World, about the apocalypse of memory and rain. And this is where I'm going to reveal all the stuff. So obviously, if you haven't caught up on yesterday's episode, big crazy spoilers, especially for yesterday, because it's the end of the show. So I think I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start with the ceremonial changing of the map. And normally I would be adding weird zones and expanding them and what have you, but not today. Today I'm gonna be removing the weird zones. See you later, Maelstrom. See you later, Minotaur. And as someone so astutely pointed out in the last episode, boop, the last weird zone. So this is our world. A lot less weird, huh? So, what I was gonna say before about games ending. God, it looks naked, hey? What I was going to say about games ending is that it happens so rarely because I think that there's this idea that for a role-playing game to be, worthwhile, really, people think of role-playing games in sort of two sorts. They're either one-shots, which you play kind of to, a maybe satisfying ending, probably not, though, depending on the game. It might just be we're going to make characters, we're going to do a couple of things, and then, time's up, right? Our 4-hour slot or our 3-hour slot is done, kind of like con game style. And okay, we had fun, we got to see a little vignette, but it's not necessarily the end of a game. So one-shots. And then people also look at role-playing games and they think, okay, campaign play. And campaigns in role-playing games tend to, by some implicit agreement of the hobby overall, have just sort of ended up as you play forever, right? You play and people leave and people join and the game goes on and on and on, and eventually people just kind of it fizzles out, right? And I'm sure you've all played games like this where it's okay, well, we're just gonna stop because and I think that happens because role-playing games are by nature not really a planned thing. They're improvisational, and as such, it's hard to think about, we're going to end it at a certain point. And so what we did with Apocalypse World, with this campaign, is we planned a combination of a sort of general idea of when the campaign might end. And Apocalypse World helped us with this because the game is built on an arc, and I'll talk about that, right? We'll talk about how the game helps or hinders finishing a campaign. And so I also want to talk a little bit about how games productize continued play, but we'll talk about that later too. So what we did with Apocalypse World was we decided, okay, we're going to run between 8 and 12 sessions, but if we're, you know, at session 7 and it feels like a good place to end, or if we're at session 13 and it's still, you know, going, we'll carry on. But the idea is to aim for that particular zone, pun not intended. We're going to aim for 8 to 12 episodes, and when we feel like there's a point that we should stop, we're going to stop. And if you're watching the end of the episode yesterday, after the third break, I guess, we sat down and said, you know, before we come back, how are you guys feeling about where this is going? Like, I feel like the end is coming, right? Gritch is really pushing for that big, get rid of the Maelstrom kind of final solution, deal with the Minotaur, you know, assuage their guilt that they've been carrying around since the beginning of the game, right? Because there are secret pains where they feel guilty for the Maelstrom, which of course played right back into what we, you know, what we did. And so I sat down with on the break with John and Avison and Andrew, and I said, you know, how do you guys feel? You know, do you want to bring this to an end? And John said, you know, John said to me, he's like, oh, I was totally feeling that it was coming to an end, but I didn't want to say anything, right? Like, we could see the end of the arc coming, but we're like, I didn't want to push it. And, you know, Andrew said the same thing, and we all kind of agreed after talking about it for a couple of minutes that, like, okay, we're gonna just like play it out, however long it takes. We might end the episode earlier, but we're gonna play it out to the end here and see what happens. And yeah, the game had some influence too, where if certain roles had gone a different way, then, you know, it would have gone differently. But so they didn't, right? So we had a planned ending, but we didn't have a planned ending. You know, we knew kind of where we were going to aim for finishing the game, but we didn't specifically try to get to the ending. We didn't say, okay, it's episode 9 and we have to end next week. You know, we didn't tell everybody, today's the last episode. We just kind of like drifted towards that final place. Hold on one second. There we go. So we sort of drifted toward that end place naturally. We just sort of like let that happen. And I think that really encouraged kind of an organic ending. Now, if you didn't see, obviously you didn't because we were on break, but if you didn't see us have that conversation, it could very much seem like a big fast ending, right? Where it was just like, oh, it's over, right? Like you're tuning down and that's it. And so it's interesting for me because this is the first time that I've ended a campaign on Twitch, right? That we've ended a live campaign with an audience, which I think is it's interesting, right? It was different for us because we had people viewing what we were doing, and so it wasn't just about us saying like, okay, I guess we're done, let's all go home. It was like, let's try to tie it up. And so I took a bit from Fiasco, which is a fantastic role-playing game, built on having a distinct beginning, middle, and end, and I added that sort of epilogue to the end of the game. You know, I said, okay, what does your character do? Tell us about what happens in the following months, right? And that's how we saw Frankie kind of becoming an uncomfortable new member of the Fishers. We saw Navarre continuing to be Navarre, doing her thing, and obviously Gritch had been blown out into the world's psychic maelstrom. So let's take a look at the aftermath, shall we? Let's have a look at where things landed. I updated this one more time. We got to look at this a little bit yesterday, but so this is where our relationship map ended up. You notice that it followed an arc, right? Like around episode 7 or so, we didn't keep adding people to the map. So it just became the question of how people were connected. Like after we added the Fishers, that really became our finished community. And in a lot of cases, you know, like with Mercer's people, with some of the Fishers, with the entire Raider community. There was some finishing of another sort. The world does not have very many people left in it, which is interesting, right? And what I think is cool is that, and this is a product of how Apocalypse World works, is that the game mechanically allows the players to interrogate or look at certain aspects of the game fiction of the world, and understand mechanically what those are about, right? And this starts at the very beginning with things like read a person, read a situation, right? You make those moves to ask the GM and the other players, what is this world about? What are the people in this world thinking and feeling? What is this situation about, right? And then the Maelstrom allows you, you open your brain, you ask about the weirdness in the world. And like I was saying to Andrew, he took every single move that allows you to pick apart the universe. Like, this game was so universe focused. This is why I think, and I was thinking about this between yesterday's game and this morning. Why did this game end up being so much about the upper level stuff, right? The Maelstrom, the kind of like overarching weird, the large kind of movements of the factions in the world, rather than about individuals. Like, there was some sex at the beginning, but very little, if any, throughout the rest of the game. There was some sort of big movements of groups, but we didn't really get to know the NPCs as much as we got to know the PCs, certainly. And you'll notice, like, look at my map here. The arrows that we have, a lot of them point inward at the PCs. Like, look at Navarre and look at Gritch, right? Like, there's a lot of, and I actually think that, like, this wasn't intentional, but I think it's interesting that Gritch and Navarre are kind of dead center and Frankie's a bit off to the side, because the game was so much about kind of the weird and about that stuff. Frankie acted as kind of the anchor. She was our straight man, so to speak, for the game, right? Giving us an anchor to kind of hold us in the world that exists, right? And in the end, she's the one that sticks around. She's the one that fundamentally becomes part of a community. And I could very easily see, if we were to continue and do like a season 2 of this with the same characters, Frankie as a hardholder, for example, and Navarre either, not present because she's gone away, or Navarre as a hocus that pulls in power from sort of the new Maelstrom, right? Which is to say, Gritch's disease consciousness. So anyway, Apocalypse World, it does this thing where the arc of the game, the narrative arc, is built in sort of seasonally, right? Where depending on how aggressive the players are with their moves and how highlighting works, they end up advancing quite quickly, and you end up in this position where after about 8 to 12 episodes, you have characters that are finished with who they are now, right? Like, because Gritch was a bit ahead of the curve, they became an angel quite quickly, right? They shed their Brainer playbook, become an angel, and sort of took that role. But also options there, like instead of taking a new playbook, would be retire the character, take a new playbook, get a new character. And that's by design, right? Apocalypse World has this built in. And you don't get to see this in a lot of role-playing games because, again, to make a sort of traditionally successful role-playing game, you have to keep churning out supplements, right? Like, you make, let's imagine we're working on like a mainstream role-playing game. Let's call it, I don't know, like Truncheons and Flagons. So it's a game about getting drunk and beat up by the town guard. So I'm working on Truncheons and Flagons, and my corporate overlords tell me, all right, you need to make X amount of dollars this year. And either that means I put out 1 book or 3 books, I don't know, arbitrary number, and those books need to make me X amount of dollars, Or I put out those books and I continually add on supplements and keep people playing, right? Because campaign investment sells copies. Now, I would love to see the industry, and I don't want to get too much into game industry talk because that's not what the show is about, but what I'm trying to say is that design influences narrative. The game you're playing influences everything about the type of play that you end up experiencing, right? So if you're playing a game like Apocalypse World, or like Dungeon World, or like Burning Wheel, or like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, they all have built into them, either obviously or unobviously, an arc to the character's sort of lifespan. It's just that in Dungeons and Dragons, it's so long, right? Like, have you ever... I would say that the percentage of people that have played a game of D&D, any edition, that has gone from 1st level to 20th level with the same character and the same group, very, very small, right? Because of all kinds of social non-game reasons. So it's very difficult to see that, and so it's not really built in inherently. D&D doesn't say, you know, this is how many sessions this game should take. And most of my favorite games do say that, right? Burning Wheel says you really hit your stride around episode session, 12. That's really where the game gets going, right? Apocalypse World says, you're going to hit the end of an arc at a certain point, and the mechanisms of the game reinforce this. It's not just fluff. They don't just say it. So, that's how game design, like the way the game is designed, both because the game is designed to be played in a certain way, like D&D is meant to be played over a long time, and because games are part of an economy, a ludographical economy, they have built in an amount of time played. It's like how long a video game is, right? Like, it's part of the selling point. So, the way that Apocalypse World lends itself to this is by saying you'll reach a point where it feels like an ending. And it definitely did, right? The ending sort of snuck up on us because what we were driving towards was, how do we fundamentally change the world, right? And like John said in the episode, the campaign, was sort of fundamentally around Gritch. And you notice that when John said that, it wasn't a complaint, right? That it wasn't like he was saying, oh, Frankie was a side character and I was bored or I was disinterested. Like, one thing that I really appreciate about this group, and if you go back and watch old episodes, you'll notice this, is that they're all paying attention. The only time that anyone forgot anything was between episodes. And when the characters forgot shit, but that's part of the setting. The only time my players had trouble remembering things was between episodes, but during the episode, even though, especially near the end, we only had screen time for like Navari and Frankie at once, and then Gritch at once, and they split it about half and half, everybody was still really engaged in the ongoing narrative. And that's something that I think made the game very strong, right? Is that people were interested in what was happening above and beyond what they were doing on screen, which is the thing that really helped us out for moving the game into a place where we could come to a conclusion that felt good for everybody and felt like it moved the game ahead. Now, I've only ever really, I would say, finished maybe a half dozen campaigns in my life, right? Like full, start to finish, intentional, now we are done because it makes sense. And sometimes you see it coming a long way away, and sometimes like this, it's like, oh wait, we're at the end. This is the end of the game. Now, one thing that's cool about Apocalypse World, and if you've been tuning in to Post-Apocalypse World the whole time, you'll notice this. The game is all about questions, right? Apocalypse World is about asking questions. It's about the characters interrogating the fiction. It's about the GM interrogating the world and thinking about what they have to say, right? What is the universe you're building telling you? What are you learning about it? And what kind of exploration can you do of that mechanically? And so what's cool about Apocalypse World is, yes, we came to the end of the sort of Gritch and Gritch versus the Maelstrom, Navari the outsider, Frankie finds a place in the world kind of storyline, the crew story, but there's so many unanswered questions. And I have some ideas about what the answers to those questions might be, but even here at the end, I have more questions to ask. More things that we can speculate, but because the game is about playing to find out, I can't ever find out the truth of these questions. And that's what makes something like Apocalypse World so different from something like Dungeons and Dragons, in that, yes, I'm the MC, but I can't just make up the answers to these questions, right? Like, for example, what happened to Sunshine? What happened to Nothing's disciples? Where's Spoiler? What happened to her? I'm not allowed to answer that question. I can't just say, this is what happens, because you play to find out. I can posit some ideas, but the players kind of have to be there for me to be able to see it really happen, which I think is fantastic and really interesting, So let's take a look. Let's take a look at where my fronts ended up, shall we? So I'm going to go through each front, and we'll check in with the NPCs and kind of what happened with them. So this was my original sheet. My characters on here, some unused names, some very, the questions I had at the beginning. These were my first episode questions. And I love being able to record all this, because we come back here 10 weeks worth of content, 40 odd hours, 44 hours later, and we can look and see if we answered these. Like, where did all this go? What was I curious about at the beginning? So, what's Mercer going to do to protect her secret? I don't know. We never really found out what that secret was. What's Mercer going to do to Gritch? Back when we thought that revenge was an option, the answer is nothing. What's Tao's deal? Why does she want to leave? So we decided that she didn't. Why was Monk helping? Because of nothing. Nothing had to get her away from Mercer. Who else remembers Eugene? Eugene didn't even have a name back here. The Maelstrom remembered. The boat remembered. It was a fake memory, but it exists. Who did Frankie get the boat from? We don't know, right? The boat was built. But none of these... The great thing is that you have these questions in the beginning, but you lose sight of them and you ask different questions as you move on, which is really neat, right? Like, stuff that matters now doesn't matter later on. Where's a safe place to take Tao to? Nowhere. She got killed several times. What's Tao's place in the Enclave? Nothing, really. Like, she was just sort of Mercer's sad reflection. Why is Hugo a liability to Mercer? Didn't matter. On screen, dead, gone. So, this is stuff that we were curious about in the beginning of the game, but that didn't come up. And as Andrew pointed out from my more names list, these are all names of SkyTrain, like train stations in Vancouver, or beaches, or locations in Vancouver. So, like, Hastings is a street, Iona is a beach, Jericho is a beach. Kind of was. Boundary is a street, Joyce is a station. I'm really sad I didn't get to use King Ed. King Ed is both a street, King Edward is both a street and a station, but King Ed is a sweet post-apocalypse name. Anyway, so this is a thing that I really like doing is that, like, and we talked about this in the very first post-apocalypse world, when you set an apocalyptic game in a fake space, you lose that disconnected edge. Like, okay, I'm gonna spoil Planet of the Apes. So I know it's like a 50 odd year spoiler warning, but if you have not seen Planet of the Apes, I'm about to spoil the ending. All right. So the reason that Planet of the Apes is so impactful and why people remember that ending, why people remember the big reveal at the end, is because it's set in a real place, and because that's what gives it a sense of sort of, it puts it into the world for us. And it's It's the same with making making up your own fiction. That if I were to put this in like the city or the desert or whatever, you do lose that edge, and it makes it feel more like fantasy. Like compare, say, like Mad Max. Like look at Fury Road. Like Fury Road is supposed to, I think, be set in Australia. I think, but they never mention anything Australian. Some of the characters have accents, but it's not really important, and it makes Mad Max feel more like fantastic. And I wanted to ground this in reality and give myself an opportunity to, I don't know, barf forth apocalyptica based on a real place. Like I can look out the window and I can see a location that the players might go to or be in. If you follow me on Twitter, a few weeks ago I went to an area right around where Jericho's hold is, to take a ferry out to the islands, and I was taking pictures, and I was like, so this is what it would have looked like now. Imagine this, you know, flooded and damaged. So, you know, it's something that I think is really cool. I like putting things in context. And I said at the very beginning, my big draw, and I've talked about this when playing Fallout too, my big draw for the apocalypse sort of fiction, that setting as a thing, is the reanalysis of the norm through a weird lens, right? People using stop signs as shields, right? People being named McDonald's because they saw it on a sign, right? That kind of stuff really sings for me, and I really like it. So setting this in Vancouver was very much like a choice for me, but it was nice because Andrew could pick up on that and like figure it out as we went. And you notice, like in the last episode, John mentioned it too, that he had kind of noticed some of that stuff. So our home front, this is where things didn't really end up getting used, or things that weren't on specific fronts. Yeah, the old crew of the Vixen, like, could have come up. I could have brought them back, but you know, it just didn't have a space. Where did Frankie get the boat from? Again, we kind of know, like, it was sort of scavenged, right? Who fights over the fishing waters? Nobody ended up doing that. How long ago was the apocalypse? I don't know. We never learned the answer to that question. Because I think that we learned false information from the Maelstrom, and Smith July remembered, you know, days ago it being not post-apocalyptic, but that could have been a weird zone, right? We have our non-threat threat, Podrick Payne. I mean Biz. Poor right hand. So his boss is gone. So, you know, new stakes question. Well, here, I'll keep one so I can edit it. What happens to Biz? Right? Like, Biz and Burns, what happened to them? You know, now that their boss is gone, where do they go? Where do they end up? Do they go back to the Clavers? Hard to say, but you know, it's sad that the PC that's able to like free the NPCs from this space of being a threat or a scarcity does that and then vanishes. An uncaring deity. So let's take a look at Fear. Let's see where Fear ended up. So the end of the campaign, Mercer's Hold was wiped out. It destabilized society because it was a place where people lived. So that dark future came to pass. Tao's disease never actually ended up saturating a population, right? It got used as a biological weapon, but maybe not in the way it was originally intended. We can move Gritch by design, by intention, straight up to transformation. But Navarre and Frankie never went past the infected stage. So, the disease. Interesting to see where that ended up. I did really like how I was able to, like, I guess, like, sort of, not retcon, but, like, fill in the background of the disease to make Gritch the original sort of designer of it. to play on that return, like the idea of them becoming an angel, not as a step forward, but as, you know, remembering the things they already remembered, or already knew. And we talked about this a bit before, that they were a doctor all along, right? And to tie them back to the world before. So what do you transform into? Evidently, the maelstrom. So in a way, despite the fact that Gritch got all the way to the end, we saw an altered version of this dark future, right? Destabilization, sure, destabilization, but of the corrosion of society, but not of human society, but of the colonizing force of the maelstroms, like people. They fought off the invasion, which is cool. So let's look at our stakes questions. What did we answer? Will the disease take away Gritch's powers? We never got to find that out. Gritch threw himself into the disease so wholeheartedly. Will nothing get what he wants? Sort of. But sad story for nothing, right? He lost everyone he was related to. We never learned about his... We never learned about his wife or the mother of his children, but both his daughters died, right? His sibling died. Like, I feel really bad for nothing. Like, that's what he ended up with. He ended up with nothing. What does transformation look like? Ascension into the maelstrom. Will nothing be able to annihilate his family? Well, no, but it happened for him anyway. Will Gritch learn the truth? Yes. We don't know how the disease affects people differently. This is a thing that would still be around, so... I mean... Yeah, it's still... We know people still have it. There are people still infected, right? How does the disease combat the zones? Well, it kills the maelstrom. When you transform, can you shrink the zones? Oh, hell yes. So I guess this is the only question left, is like, what does the disease do now? Maybe it dies off. Maybe it's finished its purpose. Maybe it mutates, right? Disease needs a reason to exist. So let's take a look at decay. So decay was a big one for us. It was the corrosion and dissolution of society by way of memory, right? This was our memory stuff. So dark future that came true here was that everybody remembers everything, that your memory all comes back. And so, you know, the question then becomes not, are we nothing more than a kingdom of ghosts, but like, what does it mean to be real? Like, is Navari a real person? Is Frankie a real person? Is Satan? Like, who gets to be real and who doesn't? Right? And I think that this was a question all the way through. But, like, was it fair to kill Mercer, to kill Tao? Like, was it the right choice? Is the world they made better than the world the Maelstrom wanted to give them? Like, on the surface, no. On the surface, it's gross and ugly and wet and disgusting. And people are sick and die. I mean, it's the whole... Like, I was realizing at the end how we're doing this kind of thing where it's like Stalker plus the Southern Reach trilogy meets The Matrix in kind of a weird way. In that it's like, is it better to be lied to and happy than to know the truth and be miserable? Yeah, not exactly. Chat's got it. Distrato says an ugly truth or a beautiful lie. Like, what about Navari? What about the people for whom the lie is reality? What about copies, right? Because I explicitly said when the wild zones, the weird zones go away, the copies don't just vanish. It's obvious they're not real anymore, but they exist. They're still around, and the ones that are alive. They're people. So, I mean, what does it mean to be real? Is that a thing? So let's look at nothing. We got almost to the nothing is comatose. Nothing didn't have a chance to, or hasn't yet had a chance to commit suicide. So I guess the question here is, Will nothing ever recover from all the terrible shit that happened to him? Well, we know what happened here, thanks to Gritch. Good job, Gritch. You killed the colonizing force, or at least drove them away. I mean, the Minotaur, the like automated entity that was there to continue the terraforming of Earth, the psychoforming of Earth. Ooh, that's a good word. I'm gonna write that down. It's like terraforming, but you know, psychically. So the psychoforming of the Earth was stopped. The Minotaur was co-opted or destroyed, but like, what does that mean? Is the Earth protected now? Is Gritch a barrier instead of a prison? I don't know. It's interesting though. In an alternate timeline, nobody interfered, and the Maelstrom just replaced it, and there's some utopic planet out there. I mean, not even an alternate universe. It's in this continuity. Somewhere there's a world that the colonizing force colonized, and it's beautiful and wonderful, and everybody that lives there is happy, but being harvested in some fashion, or like occupied, or whatever, right? Because the force is there, and they won. So interesting stuff to kind of like wonder about for this situation, and what it means to have Gritch defend the Earth from this force. So, okay, let's look at our stakes question. So, what did nothing offer the Raiders to help him? I mean, we don't know, right? Did the Clavers modify the record? Yes? Yeah, that's part of the fire, was that. What could the PCs do to save nothing? I don't know if he's savable, right? It's more about will he ever recover? And who is Tao and Mercer's mom? We don't know, right? I guess some other questions would be like, what happens to the Maelstrom? Like, my whole thought was, the Maelstrom is a prison. The Maelstrom is a barrier, a psychic barrier around the world, and it contains and modifies the psychosphere of the Earth, of the way that people operate. And what happens to it now that it has a new warden, now that the Minotaur has been co-opted by Gritch, right? Like, does the barrier turn outward? Is it a shield now? Or does Gritch start to reform the world in their image? That's creepy. So, yeah, what would that look like? Because, I mean, that's a dark future right there. Like, yay, we stopped the colonizing force. Yay, Gritch is trying to change the world. Right, and I wonder if that's even a thing that Gritch would be capable of not doing. The whole sort of point of Gritch's character was they're a meddler, right? They're a schemer. So, what does that look like? I guess the question would be here, too. That's our question. So, that's decay. Let's look at hunger. So hunger is all about the fissures. Now, we realized kind of coming up in the end that the fissures, the bountiful water, is actually a weird zone. And I think that in destroying or defeating the Maelstrom, that advances the bountiful water all the way to the end, and it dries up. The fish all die or go somewhere else. So, you know, this particular threat is gone. And so what do we do now? Like, where does the food come from? You know, the Fisher clans, there was going to be food wars. There might still be, right? Like, we see the Fishers at the edge of a big change, a big expansive change. They're going to go out into the world. They're going to take a place. And so What is that going to look like? And what is Frankie's place in that? So let's look at our stakes questions for this one. So what's the deal with the Fissures' exclusive use? It was a weird zone, and it was tied to the Fissures somehow. What will we do when the water dries up? I guess that's another question. Like, honestly, I think season 2 of this game, if we were to jump right into it, and I would love it. I would absolutely love it if you're a fan of the show and you want to play Apocalypse World, use this world. Start here. Start with the Maelstrom being Gritch's disintegrated consciousness throughout the world. Start with the Fissures on the edge of war. Start with foreign powers coming in now that the area is different. Start with the ruins of the fortress. Start with the clavers. Start with the stuff that we've built here and pick up and take off from there. That's totally a thing that I think it would be amazing. It'd be super cool to see that happen. So anyway, I see this as being the beginning, right? The Fissures having to adapt. Scarcity of food, which we didn't have before. Scarcity of food. We don't have scarcity of memory anymore, but the scarcity is food and safety. This is a much more traditional post-apocalypse. So what will Jonah do? There's going to be a power struggle, right? Because Satan is sort of de facto leader right now, and Jonah is not being respected, really. What happened to Satan, right? We still don't really know how Nothing in Gritch hurt Satan. Like, what was that about? Satan will remember, though, right? And Nothing might be in big-ass trouble. Did the Clavers engineer the record? Well, we're not sure, right? Who's the Claver agent? It wasn't Jesus. Jesus got killed. It was Tyne. Tyne was hiding among the Fissures. So this isn't really going to matter very much because the truth becomes, the gospel becomes truth and the truth becomes gospel. Like, it's just, the record is what it is. And then people will remember engineering it and it'll either come up or it won't, right? So questions that I have here would be like, how will people adapt? There's no food readily available. What about look at all these questions. Well, the Fissures. And to that end, I mean, internal conflict, who's going to be in charge? Right, will it come to that? Will Satan and their minions try to take over? Like, what's going to happen here? Yeah, bride of Satan, exactly. With Frankie at their side. So, there's a lot of really interesting things here that would come up. I see the Fissures as not an ending, but a beginning, right? The Fissures are a new thing. And they're not what they were before. And I think that that's very interesting, that this is a place where you could very easily start a game. And then finally, despair. And despair because this idea of, like, why is the world like this, and why are we the only ones who can try to fix it, right? The Clave Dwellers are the last splintered remains of the world that came before, right? They're the CDC. They're the people that are left to try to clean up the apocalypse, right? And we fed a little bit of stuff into the game from the GM turns about where that came from. Gritch got added to sort of the Claver situation. And so, the Clavers created the disease, Gritch especially, gave it to Nothing. They were trying to, like, reprogram or utilize Navarre because they knew from the beginning that she was a weapon in the Maelstrom. Their memory effect is a shield. They can control and engineer it. They've been psychically manipulating Satan with dreams to get the Fishers to do things. And their predecessors tried to fight the apocalypse and failed. So I can actually take Burns off of here because Burns belongs to Gritch's crew, and I would make a new front for them. You know, maybe the Gritch cult of the Maelstrom, you know, Biz and them, and maybe they would absorb Nothing's cult because people whose religious leader dies, they go looking for a new one. So let's look at our stakes questions. What did Navarre promise Tyne before? What's the broken promise? We'll never know because Tyne died and Navarre might not be real. Why does Brentwood hate Navarre so much? Again, maybe because Navarre is a failed experiment. Maybe something bad happened. We don't know. What's the history between Preen and Amble? Something for next time. Something for later. What will Metropolis do with Gritch and Nothing? We found out the answer to that. What will Burns do? Burns will help Gritch. What will Gritch do when they learn the truth? Well, we know that. They'll become the Maelstrom. We don't know if Nothing will succeed. I guess we'll wait and find out. What about Navarre? Do the Clavers still have a plan for her? This takes on a different question because they know about her. They know she's not real. Do they have a plan for her? And this is all part of a larger, you know, now that they've won, what will the Clavers do? Right? How are they going to fit in, right? What is their place in society now that they're visible? So there's all kinds of really interesting questions here about because what's left after all the PC damage clears? We have this. We have the Clavers who are revealed, but no one knows that they've fixed the world, right? They can claim it, but there's no way to prove it. So what's going to happen to them? How are they going to get related to the Fishers? What's that situation going to be like? You know, God, I'm so curious about what this world would be like in 10 years or 20 years when people tell stories about Navarre, the Destroyer. You know, and Frankie's around, but she's like an old woman, an old hard holder. You know, in 30 years or 40 years as time goes on. What's this place going to be like? You know, it's interesting. So, you know, I wanted to have this last episode of Post-Apocalypse World to show you that once the game is over, it's worth taking a look at your fronts and worth taking a look at the world where it is, and like basically just kind of asking yourself what is this place like? Because you're creating a situation when you're making a role-playing game setting and you're building a campaign. You're creating a situation in which you're focusing on a specific subset of people for just a little while, right? Even in a long campaign, even if your campaign travels years, you're only seeing a tiny piece of the universe as it moves. And so while our story was the story of Smith, July, Navarre, Gritch, and Frankie, the world's story contains so many more people. You know, Nothing has a story. Sunshine's got a story. And those stories aren't over. Right? And so for me, it's really valuable to get a sense of not closure necessarily, but a sense of continuity to the world. A sense of like, what else is going on, and how might this world carry on without us? You know, once we close this window and step away from the computer, you know, the game's characters can sort of live on theoretically in our head, and we might come back and visit them again. And I would definitely encourage you, if you want more damp apocalypse, to make it yourself. You know, to get out there and to find some players, start up a Roll20 game, and make it happen. Because that's the great thing about role-playing games, right? Is that functionally we're all just creating like fan fiction for a universe that we've all kind of shared in our head anyway. So, you know, this like damp apocalypse that we've created, only this tiny sliver really belongs to me and Andrew and Austin and John and Avison. The world that we've made, feel free to play in it, right? Go and dig around, right? Make up your own stories. This is just Vancouver. What does San Francisco look like? What does Alaska look like? What does Hong Kong look like? What is the inland like? What does Omaha, Nebraska look like in this apocalypse? Now that Gritch is in charge of the Maelstrom, right? And I guess that's sort of the whole ethos of why I do this show specifically, but all of these shows that I do online, is that I want people to see that creating collaborative improvised fiction by way of a role-playing game is something that anybody can do. You know, it's a group effort. So what's your story going to be like, right? So again, I mean, thank you so much for watching. You know, if I said this yesterday, if you've been watching from the beginning, if you've caught all the episodes live, I mean it. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to all of us. If this is your, you know, you're at the end of a YouTube view and it's the year, you know, 2020, you know, I hope that watching this antiquated video in 2 dimensions has been fun for you. And hey, if you dig this video up somehow off of a backup satellite 1,000 years from now and the post-apocalypse happened, I hope that your post-apocalypse is as much fun as ours was. If you have questions for me about the game, if you have feedback, all of us would love to hear it. Fan art. If you do what I said and you pick up the game and you run with it and you create your own damp apocalypse, please, like, tweet at me. Tell me about it, because I want to watch. I want to host you if you do it live. I want other people to see it. So get out there and make your own stuff. You can follow me on Twitter at SkinnyGhost. Follow the whole Roll20 team, Roll20 app. And you can follow us for more live role-playing right here, twitch.tv/Roll20 app. And if you're seeing this live, in but 5 short hours, we're going to be picking up with episode 2 of The Burning Wheel. So stay tuned for that. I mean, ostensibly not, you know, the entire time. But yeah, and if you want to, in the meantime, if you want to discuss the game, if you want to put together a group, go to reddit/r/Roll20, and you can find a group there, or use the built-in Roll20 looking for group, and just flag Apocalypse World, and you'll be able to find some players. Thank you so much for coming. This game has been an experience. It's so much fun to be able to create a full game, start to finish, with all of you here to watch with me. So I hope you've had a good time. Thanks for coming. See you next time, everybody.